My name is Adrian Cole. I'm 30 years old, and I manage one of the largest investment firms in Manhattan. My routine revolves around non-stop pressure, major negotiations, intense boardroom discussions, and financial reports that keep me working late into the night. The company oversees hundreds of millions in assets, handles mergers that can reshape entire industries, and runs on a schedule so tight that sometimes I barely stop long enough to breathe. On the surface, my life looks exactly like what most people would call success. I live in a luxurious penthouse with a view of Central Park, drive a custom-built Porsche, and wear suits crafted by the best tailors in Milan. For me, productivity and precision are everything. I plan each step carefully, analyze every decision, and treat efficiency almost like a personal creed. Yet beneath all of that, something feels empty. My life leaves no space for complicated things like emotions or relationships. Love has always seemed like a fantasy reserved for people who have time to spare. After watching so many marriages fall apart among people in my social circle, I've come to see it as another unnecessary risk. Blind dates are even worse in my opinion. Too unpredictable, too messy, and usually a poor way to spend an evening that could be used reviewing financial reports instead. There is one person, however, who still manages to break through the walls I've built around myself: my mother, Margaret Cole. She's 62 now and fighting a severe form of kidney disease. 3 times a week she has to undergo dialysis, and watching her go through it has been incredibly difficult. The lively, energetic woman I grew up with has gradually been worn down by hospital visits and a long list of medications. Despite everything she's dealing with, she still tries to help others whenever she has the strength. On her better days, she volunteers at a small community clinic in Brooklyn. She spends her time handing out blankets, talking with patients, and offering quiet support to people who need it. That gentle kindness has always been a part of who she is. It was at that clinic that she met someone she thought I should meet. She didn't pressure me about it. My mother has never been the type to push. Instead, she brought it up during one of the few evenings we managed to have dinner together. "Adrian," she said gently, her voice calm but sincere, "you work harder than anyone I know. But life isn't only about numbers, just meet her once for me." I agreed in the end, not because I expected anything meaningful to come from it, but because seeing that hopeful look in her eyes made it impossible to refuse. After everything she had been through, agreeing to one simple request felt like the least I could do. Before the meeting, I made a simple plan in my head: 20 minutes, no more. I'd exchange a few polite words, mention an early appointment the next morning, and leave, quick, efficient, and painless. That night, Manhattan was drowning in rain. Water poured down the sides of skyscrapers and rushed along the streets like shallow rivers. I arrived at the restaurant a few minutes ahead of schedule, just as I always did. Being on time or early had always been one of my rules. The place my mother had chosen was an elegant French restaurant on the Upper East Side, tucked inside one of the neighborhood's older buildings. Inside, everything felt refined and quiet: heavy velvet curtains framing the windows, crystal chandeliers casting warm light over the tables, and waiters moving so smoothly they were almost invisible. I selected a secluded table in the corner where we could talk privately. After sitting down, I ordered a glass of scotch served neat and glanced at my watch. 6:55 p.m. While waiting, I scrolled through the growing list of emails on my phone, answering a few as the rain continued tapping against the tall windows. The city lights outside reflected on the wet streets, glowing softly through the glass. At 7:12 p.m., 12 minutes past the agreed time, something that already had me impatiently tapping my fingers on the table, the woman finally walked through the door. Emma Lawson. She looked around my age, maybe in her early 30s. She didn't enter the room with dramatic confidence or draw attention in an obvious way, yet there was something about her presence that made people notice her anyway. Her outfit was simple, a navy blue dress that reached just below her knees. There were no flashy accessories or obvious designer labels. Her hair was pulled back into a tidy ponytail, and her makeup was minimal, just enough to highlight her clear hazel eyes and the faint freckles scattered across her nose. The only jewelry she wore was a thin silver bracelet around her wrist. After stepping inside, she quickly scanned the dining room until her gaze landed on me. She closed her umbrella near the entrance, then walked toward the table with calm, steady steps. She didn't seem like someone who spent her evenings at high-end restaurants or business gatherings like the ones I was used to. When she reached the table and sat down, she gave me a small, sincere smile. It wasn't the practiced, flirtatious smile I'd seen countless times before. Instead, it felt natural, almost peaceful. "Adrian?" she asked, her voice warm and steady, carrying a faint Midwestern accent that surprised me. I stood up briefly out of habit before sitting again. "Emma," I replied, "thanks for coming out in this weather." She shrugged lightly, dismissing the storm outside. "It's only rain," she said, though I wasn't sure I'd make it on time. Traffic was terrible. We didn't spend much time deciding on food. I ordered steak frite while she chose coq au vin, and we agreed to share a bottle of Bordeaux. Almost immediately, Emma brushed aside the typical formalities that usually came with first meetings. "Just so you know," she said calmly, "I'm aware this whole thing was arranged by your mom. She's wonderful, by the way. We've spent quite a bit of time talking at the clinic. But I'm not here to try to impress you or play any kind of game." Her straightforward honesty caught me completely off guard. Most women I'd met in similar situations relied on carefully crafted charm or subtle bragging. Emma's approach was refreshingly direct. She began explaining how she had met my mother while volunteering at the Brooklyn clinic. On weekends, she helped sort donated items and spent time speaking with patients who came through the doors. During the week, however, she worked as an elementary school teacher in East Harlem. As the appetizers arrived, escargot covered in garlic butter, she began talking about her classroom. "This year I've got 28 students," she said. "Some mornings a few of them show up hungry because their parents are working double shifts, or sometimes worse. So I keep a stash of granola bars in my desk just in case." She didn't speak with pity or exaggeration. She simply shared the reality of her day-to-day life, her voice steady and determined. For once, I found myself listening more than talking, which was unusual for me. When she asked about my own life, I offered the polished version. The firm, the endless deals, the high-pressure negotiations. "Sounds intense," she said, tilting her head thoughtfully. "Do you ever get a break from it all?" Her curiosity wasn't judgmental, just genuine. And somehow, the conversation began to flow naturally, smoother than I had expected. Emma shared stories from her classroom, kids arguing over whether Pluto still qualified as a planet, or drawing pictures of their dream homes, which often ended up being modest apartments with working heat. One boy, Jamal, told her he looked after his younger sister at night because his mother worked late shifts. At just 9 years old, he already carried so much responsibility. Her eyes softened as she spoke, not with sentimentality but with quiet protectiveness. What struck me wasn't simply the stories themselves, they were worlds away from my boardrooms, but the way she spoke about her students, as if each of them truly mattered. "I can't fix their entire lives," she said, putting down her fork, "but I can make sure they feel seen, that someone notices them." Her words lingered in the air. For the first time that evening I found myself silent. My world revolved around leverage and acquisitions, where people were assets or liabilities. Hers revolved around something as basic as making sure a child didn't go unnoticed. In that moment, as the rain poured relentlessly outside, I felt something unfamiliar stirring inside me, curiosity, maybe even respect. As the meal wound down, Emma asked for a to-go box for the leftovers from her coq au vin. I didn't think much of it at the time. Perhaps she was saving it for later or simply didn't want to waste food. We settled the bill, which I insisted on paying out of habit, and stepped back into the unrelenting rain. The valet had my car ready, but Emma waved off the umbrella offered by the doorman, clutching the small container under her arm. "Thanks for dinner," she said, her voice cutting clearly through the sound of the rain. It was unexpected. I nodded, already rehearsing my excuse about an early meeting the next morning. But as we moved toward the curb, she paused under a nearby awning. A man was huddled against the wall, a homeless figure, probably in his 50s, wrapped in a tattered coat with a cardboard sign blurred by the wet. Without hesitation, Emma approached him, knelt slightly, and handed him the container. "It's still warm," she said softly. "Coq au vin, fancy but good." The man looked up, surprised, and murmured a quiet thank you as he accepted it. Emma straightened, nodded to him, and turned back toward me as though it had been the most natural thing in the world. No explanation, no performance, she just did it. Standing there, rain dripping from my coat, I realized that in my world, acts of charity were carefully calculated, tax-deductible donations at glamorous galas. This quiet, unannounced act in the middle of a storm was entirely different. Raw, honest, unfiltered. For the first time that evening, I forgot about my watch. The 20-minute limit I had set for the date had long passed, and I hadn't even noticed. We said our goodbyes awkwardly, Emma catching a cab, me sliding into my Porsche. As I drove through the rain-slicked streets, my mind replayed the evening. Emma wasn't like anyone I knew in my usual circles. There was no pretense, no hidden agendas, no carefully calculated charm. Her world felt entirely separate from mine, almost like we were speaking different languages. I told myself it was over, a one-time meeting, a story to tell my mother so she could rest easy. Our lives were too different, me, closing deals in glass towers, her guiding children through the struggles of East Harlem. By the next morning, the memory had been buried under a stack of emails and the relentless rhythm of conference calls. But a few days later, fate, or something resembling it, had other plans. I was in East Harlem inspecting a potential development site for a mixed-use project. The neighborhood was gritty, crumbling brownstones, chain-link fences, and streets lined with agging brick buildings. Yet the numbers made sense: rising property values, easy subway access, and a vacant lot next to a public school flagged by my team. I had to see it in person. As I walked the perimeter, tablet in hand taking notes, laughter echoed from the playground next door. Children's voices, shrill, joyous, chaotic, cut through the urban hum. Curiosity drew me closer to the fence. And there she was, Emma, dressed in jeans and a simple sweater, surrounded by a lively group of elementary school students. She was running a game with effortless energy, her ponytail swinging as she laughed at their antics. One little girl, perhaps 7 or 8, clung to her side. The child had a prosthetic foot, visible beneath rolled-up pants, yet moved with surprising agility, chasing a ball. Emma lifted her gently, planting a quick kiss on her forehead. "Mia, you're faster than lightning today," she said with a smile. The scene was chaotic but warm. Kids of every background tumbled over one another, no walls, no barriers, just pure, unfiltered energy. I must have lingered too long because a boy noticed me and shouted, "Hey, mister, you a spy?" Suddenly, a swarm of children ran over, pressing faces against the chain-link fence. I froze, unaccustomed to such raw, unfiltered attention. In the boardroom, people listened to my words carefully. Here, I was just a stranger in a suit. Emma noticed the commotion and came over, her expression a mix of amusement and surprise. "Adrian, what are you doing here?" I explained about the site visit, keeping it brief. The kids didn't care. They dragged me through the gate with Emma silently approving and pulled me into their world. One handed me a jump rope, another challenged me to a race. Mia tugged at my sleeve. "Can you push me on the swing?" For the next half hour I was completely swept up in their energy, pushing swings, dodging tag, even attempting a clumsy cartwheel that sent them into fits of laughter. Emma watched quietly from the sidelines, arms crossed, a soft, knowing smile on her lips. It was exhausting, exhilarating, and completely foreign to me. When recess ended and the children filed back inside, I straightened my tie, feeling oddly disheveled. "There's a handful," I said, catching my breath. Emma simply nodded, "But they're everything." As we noticed a faded sign near the playground asking for donations, I reached instinctively for my wallet. "Let me contribute something, supplies, meals, whatever you need," I said, pulling out a few $100s. But Emma stopped me. She placed her hand over mine, looking me directly in the eyes. "If you really want to help," she said firmly, "stay, don't just throw money at it." I froze. No one had ever refused my donations so deliberately before. It wasn't rude, it was a challenge. A call to do more than simply pay to feel good from a distance. In that moment, standing under the grey Harlem sky, my curiosity about her deepened. Back at my office days later, surrounded by the hum of analysts and the gleam of glass walls, her words echoed in my mind. "Don't just throw money at it." Simple yet piercing. In my world, money solved everything. It bought loyalty, closed deals, erased problems. Yet here was a woman, a teacher in East Harlem, rejecting it like it meant nothing. Why choose this life, scraping by on a teacher's salary, helping children who had nothing, over the opportunities she could have taken? I told myself it was mere curiosity, nothing more. But that night, after a grueling negotiation that added another 9-figure acquisition to my firm's portfolio, I found myself in my penthouse, bourbon in hand, staring out at the city lights. On a whim, I looked her up online, not in depth, just enough to satisfy a gnawing question. What I discovered surprised me. Emma Lawson had graduated from Yale with a degree in economics. Her thesis on sustainable urban development was still cited in academic circles. She had been recruited immediately by a top Wall Street investment bank, the kind of career launchpad I had once walked myself, yet she never reported for her first day. Instead, she shifted quietly into teaching, completing a certification program at Columbia while volunteering in inner-city schools. There was no public fallout, no dramatic announcement, just a quiet choice to move from potential boardrooms to classrooms. Digging further, I discovered more about her personal life. She had once been engaged to a prominent venture capitalist named Ethan Hargrove, a man I had encountered at industry events. Their wedding was called off abruptly 5 years ago. Rumors in society columns suggested his involvement in questionable offshore dealings, though nothing was ever proven legally. Emma had walked away quietly, without alimony, without drama, and disappeared entirely from that social circle. Then there was Mia, the little girl with the prosthetic foot. She wasn't just one of Emma's students. Court records showed that Emma had become Mia's legal guardian after the girl's parents were killed in a hit-and-run 3 years earlier. Emma fought for custody against distant relatives and used her own savings to cover medical bills and therapy. Beyond that, she ran after-school programs on her own, partnering with local shelters to provide meals and tutoring. This wasn't glamorous philanthropy designed for publicity or tax benefits. It was hands-on, gritty work. Emma could have been living a life like mine, a luxurious loft, fundraisers, champagne and power lunches. Instead, she devoted herself to a modest existence, pouring her energy into children with nothing. Why she made this choice became a question I couldn't shake. That night I paced my penthouse, bourbon untouched, thinking about her world and the life she had chosen over wealth and status. The next morning, on impulse, I contacted my assistant and arranged an anonymous donation to Emma's school. A substantial sum, $50,000, was transferred through a foundation I controlled. It was meant to fund supplies, a breakfast program, and maybe even some much-needed playground renovations. I convinced myself this was enough, efficient, impactful, and without personal involvement. I could help without actually stepping into her world, proving to myself that I could make a difference on my own terms, or so I thought. A week went by without a word from her. I assumed she hadn't noticed, or perhaps she attributed it to a generous but faceless benefactor. Business carried on as usual. Another merger closed successfully, stock prices climbed. And my calendar remained a relentless fortress of back-to-back meetings. Then one afternoon, as I was finishing a strategy session in the conference room, my receptionist buzzed. "Mr. Cole, there's a Miss Emma Lawson here to see you. She says it's urgent." My pulse quickened. How had she found out? Within minutes, she was ushered into my office, stepping in like she belonged among the minimalist decor and panoramic city views. She wore her teacher's outfit, slacks, a blouse and practical flats, and held a manila envelope. "No appointment, no preamble," she said, her tone calm but edged with frustration. "Adrian," she continued, sliding the envelope across the desk, "we need to talk." Inside, the donation confirmation was visible, my foundation's name circled in red pen. "Anonymous, really?" she asked. "It wasn't hard to trace, your mother on the clinic board, and she mentioned your family's philanthropy once." I leaned back defensive. I thought I was helping. The school needed it, the kids needed it, the breakfast program she had mentioned. Emma's eyes didn't flash with anger but with disappointment. "You don't get it, do you?" she said. "Throwing money around isn't helping, it's avoiding. Those kids don't need a check from some faceless donor. They need people, someone to show up, to see them, to care." For the first time in years, I had no words. In negotiations, I always had leverage, a counteroffer, a solution. But here she was right. I had hidden behind money, using it as a shield to control outcomes without being present. Emma shook her head. "If you want to make a difference, come to the school. Volunteer an hour, read to the kids, help with homework, be there. But don't pretend a wire transfer fixes anything." The door clicked shut, leaving me alone with the envelope mocking me. That encounter shook me far more than any lost deal ever could. For the first time I felt exposed, not as a CEO, but as a man who had built walls so high he'd forgotten how to connect. Money had always been my armor. Emma had just pierced it with a simple truth: true care requires presence, not proxies. Sitting there, overlooking the city below, her words echoed in my mind. I wondered if I even knew how to show up for anyone anymore. A few weeks after Emma's unexpected visit to my office, I was awakened early by a phone call. It was Mount Sinai Hospital, where my mother had been receiving her treatments. The nurse's voice was calm but carried urgency. "Mr. Cole, your mother's condition has worsened. "She's in the ICU, you need to come immediately." My chest tightened, heart hammering as I threw on clothes, grabbed my keys and sped downtown. Traffic blurred past me, but my mind raced even faster, imagining every possible scenario. Kidney failure wasn't new, but this felt different, final. When I reached the hospital, sweat clinging to my clothes despite the cool air, I realized just how powerless I was. Suits, billion-dollar deals and influence meant nothing here. I could buy companies, manipulate markets, but I couldn't buy more time for her. The ICU was a sterile limbo of beeping machines and quiet voices. My mother lay fragile under harsh fluorescent lights, tubes snaking from her arms, monitors tracking her weakening heartbeat. The doctor pulled me aside. "She's stable for now, but the dialysis isn't holding. We're discussing transplant options again." His words trailed off, leaving the grim implication unsaid. I nodded numbly, sinking into a chair outside her room, staring at the linoleum floor. In the boardroom, I had always controlled outcomes. Here, I had none. Hours passed in a haze, coffee from a vending machine, ignored emails piling up on my phone, packing, replaying old conversations, regretting the dinners I'd skipped for work. Why hadn't I shown up more? Her words from that confrontation with Emma echoed in my mind, presence over proxies. Money could never replace presence. As evening fell, casting long shadows across the hospital corridor, a familiar figure appeared, Emma, moving purposefully but quietly, carrying a small tote bag. "Adrian," she said softly as she approached. I was surprised but too drained to question her presence. "I heard from the clinic volunteers. How is she?" I answered honestly. "Not good, they're monitoring her, but it's serious." Emma simply nodded. No platitudes, no hollow reassurances, just a gentle squeeze on my arm. "Can I see her?" she asked. I let her in. My mother was asleep, her breathing shallow. Emma set her bag down, pulled up a chair beside the bed and took my mother's hand. Without speaking, she began humming a soft, old lullaby, her voice low and soothing, wrapping the room in fragile calm. My mother stirred slightly, a faint smile crossing her lips as if recognizing the comfort. I watched from the doorway, a lump forming in my throat. Emma stayed over an hour, alternating between humming and quietly telling stories about her students, light, hopeful anecdotes that filled the silence. When she finally rose to leave, wiping her eyes, I managed a hoarse, "Thank you." She shook her head. "I've been visiting her at the clinic for months. She's like family to me there, strong woman, reminds me of my own mom." It hit me then, Emma hadn't come for me. This wasn't about our awkward date or my failed donation. She was here simply because she cared, purely without any agenda. As she left, promising to check back, I sat alone, realizing how isolated my world had become. Money couldn't summon this kind of quiet support. The following week blurred into a haze of hospital vigils and work crises. I barely managed to keep up with the firm, and yet my thoughts kept returning to my mother. She had stabilized enough to go home under stricter monitoring, but the scare left a lingering shadow over every decision, every movement. I threw myself back into the office, closing a major real estate fund, yet the victories felt hollow. The deals, the numbers, the accolades, they no longer carried the same weight. Then, in the middle of an investor meeting one afternoon, my phone rang. An unfamiliar number, traced to East Harlem Public School. "Mr. Cole, this is Principal Ramirez. You're listed as an emergency contact for Mia Gonzalez. There's been an accident." My stomach dropped. Mia, the little girl with the prosthetic foot from the playground. Why had my name even been on file? The principal explained that Emma had added me after that spontaneous playground visit, just in case. Apparently, a child riding a bike had collided with Mia as she crossed the street. She was on her way to the ER with a possible concussion and a leg injury. Without hesitation, I bolted from the conference room, muttering rushed apologies to the investors. This wasn't negotiable, boardrooms could wait. At the ER, chaos reigned. Nurses moved quickly, families hovered anxiously, and Mia sat in a bay, small and frightened, her prosthetic slightly askew. Tears streaked her face as paramedics checked her vitals. "It hurts," she whimpered when she saw me. I knelt beside her, taking her tiny hand. "Hey, lightning girl, remember me?" "The guy who can't cartwheel," she said, managing a weak giggle through the pain. The ambulance ride to the specialized pediatric unit was a blur. I rode alongside her, holding her hand and telling stories to distract her. Tales of fast cars, silly office mishaps, and exaggerated adventures. Does your car fly? She asked shakily. Almost, I replied, forcing a smile, but only when no one's looking. When we arrived, the doctors whisked her away for scans. I paced the waiting area, calling the school for updates. An hour later, Emma arrived, breathless and pale. Adrian, how are you here? She asked, shocked. I explained the call and the emergency contact listing. She froze, then pulled me into a brief but intense hug. You came, you stayed with her, she said, her voice cracking. I was in a staff meeting, my phone was off, thank you. As we waited for news, Mia's concussion was mild, her leg bruised but intact. She leaned against me in the sterile chairs. In that moment, seeing her vulnerability mirror my own from my mother's scare, I realized something had shifted. I had shown up not with a check but with myself, and for the first time it felt enough. After the chaos of Mia's accident and my mother's health scare, something inside me changed. It wasn't a sudden epiphany, no dramatic resignation from the firm or overnight transformation. Instead, the shift was gradual, subtle, like dawn slowly creeping over the Manhattan skyline. Mia recovered quickly. Her concussion faded into a story she retold to her classmates, exaggerated for effect. Meanwhile, Emma and I began spending more time together, not strictly dates but shared moments that built a deeper connection. Coffee after school pickups. Walks through Central Park where she pointed out birds I'd never noticed, quiet evenings discussing everything from market trends to the dreams of her students. She never pushed, never forced anything. She simply existed as a steady presence, one that made me want to reciprocate. I started rearranging my priorities, carving space for life beyond profit margins without abandoning the boardroom entirely. The first step was small, volunteering once a week at the school, reading to children or helping with math exercises. At first it felt awkward, me in my tailored shirts, surrounded by crayon chaos, but the children's unfiltered joy chipped away at my walls. Mr. Adrian, why do you wear fancy clothes? Jamal asked one day, tugging at my tie. I laughed, truly laughed for the first time in years. Emma watched quietly from the sidelines, a small knowing smile on her face. See, she seemed to say, you're good at this. Inspired, I proposed a bigger idea, funding and building a community centre attached to the school, a space for after-school tutoring, meals and activities, not anonymously this time. I became fully involved, attending planning meetings, coordinating with architects and even swinging a hammer during construction weekends. Emma was my partner in everything. Late at night in her modest Harlem apartment, we pored over blueprints together, debating layouts over takeout. This isn't just about the building, she said, eyes shining. It's about giving these kids a safe space to dream. Her passion was contagious, forcing me to confront the way I had insulated myself from life. One evening, as we sat on her fire escape watching the city hum below, I opened up about my fears. The pressure of running the firm, the emptiness despite success, and how my mother's illness had exposed my isolation. I thought power meant control, I admitted. She took my hand. Power is what you do with it, she said. You've got a good heart, Adrian, let it lead. Over the months, our connection grew naturally, rooted in respect and shared purpose rather than fireworks or grand gestures. A year after that rain-soaked blind date, the community centre finally opened its doors. We named it the Harlem Horizon Hub, a modern space with classrooms, a kitchen for communal meals and a renovated playground. The ribbon cutting was modest but meaningful, attended by local officials, teachers, volunteers, and a crowd of excited children. I stood at the podium, sleeves rolled up, suit jacket off for the first time in a public address. This wasn't about mergers, stock prices, or profits. This isn't just an investment in bricks and mortar, I said, scanning the faces in the crowd. It's an investment in futures. I gestured to Emma beside me. And I couldn't have done it without this woman, Emma Lawson, who taught me that real change begins with showing up. The applause was warm, the cameras flashing. My mother sat in the front row, frail but beaming, her dialysis port hidden beneath a scarf. Later, she pulled me aside. I always hoped you'd meet someone like her, she said softly. Someone who sees the man behind the title. Life accelerated after that. The centre flourished. Children like Mia and Jamal thrived in its programs and volunteers poured in. My firm adapted too. I began incorporating social impact metrics into our deals, much to the surprise of the board. Emma and I grew closer. Our worlds began to merge naturally. Weekends in the Hamptons, quiet drives upstate to escape the city's noise, learning to skip stones and appreciate the small things together. Intimacy developed not as conquest but as connection. Shared silences, gentle touches, nights spent talking until dawn about rebuilding lives, including our own. Another year passed, and on a bright spring afternoon we held a small wedding in the garden of the centre. No black tie affair, just close friends, a few colleagues, the children from her class, and my mother walking me down the aisle with surprising strength. Emma wore a simple white dress, accented with flowers from the playground woven into her hair. Mia was the flower girl, scattering petals with glee. Under a blooming arbor, we exchanged vows. I promised to be present, not just provide. Emma vowed to remind me of the humanity in every equation. As we kissed, the children cheered and Mia barreled into us, hugging our legs. "We're family now," she shouted, her prosthetic clicking against the stone path. Looking back, that blind date wasn't an obligation. It was the spark that ignited a completely new life. I still run my firm, but now with purpose. Profits support scholarships, community projects, and programs that uplift others. Emma and I live in a brownstone near the centre, our days a blend of her classroom chaos and my strategic calm. Mia visits often, calling us her bonus family. My mother, miraculously stable on her treatments, joins us for Sunday dinners, her eyes twinkling as she watches the life we've built. I've learned that real wealth isn't measured in ledgers. It's in the quiet acts, the shared burdens, the light in someone's eyes when you show up. Emma didn't just change my world, she showed me how to truly live in it.